for everybody coming on. I'm Kyle Forster. I'm the founder of RunWhen, and I just want to say thanks a ton for tuning in to this episode. I'm so excited to have Ray with us. Ray has been an invaluable source of advice and coaching, and every once in a while, just a shoulder to cry on. Through the last couple of years of the RunWhen journey, through what has been, Ray, I think on your side, multiple different roles now, multiple different companies. Mm-hmm. Let me turn it over and let you introduce yourself, but let me just start out with a great big thank you. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and thank you for having me. So I'm Ray Myers. I am a software engineering tech lead. I've been in the industry 17 years, a number of different kinds of organizations and different industries there. Just recently, I have started as chief architect at All Hands AI. But we actually booked this before that because that is such new information. So fortunately, they have allowed me to appear. But the opinions that we're going to talk about, this is what I've developed, being a software engineering tech lead and kind of AI skeptical pundit here. And I don't know that it'll reflect exactly what you'd hear from my employer, right? I'm not officially, their mouthpiece on this one, but I will say that there is a reason why they're the ones that I went to work for.
Yeah, I think that might be. There's a reason that I'm there, but this is not official. It's probably the cleanest, best intro to these types of things that I think I've heard so far.
Yeah, but fortunately, they do put their thoughts out there on their blog, so you can find out from the founders' mouths exactly where they see these things going as well.
And on your side with Craft versus Craft, and then this feedback board, you've been very, very active. I would say outside the auspices of the day job in this area for quite a while. I'd love to get into all that, but let's see if we have time, because I think there were a couple. There was one thing we were trading emails about. Mm-hmm. And I thought I just thought your answers were more thoughtful than anybody that I'd ever heard on this topic. And I was kind of hoping that you'd share a little bit with everybody, so it's not just like a private conversation between us. The conversation was I'm going to summarize it like coding versus engineering. Because it became the title for this podcast because I liked it so much. But tell me your thoughts.
So first off, there are people who want to make the argument of whether or not software development counts as engineering in the first place, like whether software engineering is a legitimate engineering field. And Hillel Wayne's probably got the best treatment I've seen on that, where he interviewed a bunch of trad engineering field people. And I will just say, I come out, yes, but it's not really important to this distinction. We're just talking about whether software development as it exists in a scaled professional context is the same thing as coding. And my argument is that it contains coding, but it contains many other things. And when we try to advance the state of the art, we must attempt to fully understand it. And this is I think been a really important thing to focus on with AI coding assistance, for instance.
I mean, there were two pieces of academic work that you kind of sent me, and I was wondering if you could talk about them and summarizing them a bit. I can put the links for anybody who's listening in. I can put the links in the chat after the show.
Yeah, those are both, I think, published in IEEE journals, and one is 2015, I Know What You Did Last Summer, an investigation of how developers spend their time. The other one, it's both great names. The other one is 2019, Today Was a Good Day, The Life of Software Developers. So there's many other, this is a matter of consensus. We're just talking about the details at this point, but you can even look at just the amount of time people spend just within their IDE, and writing code is still a minority of that. And we spend a lot of time outside the IDE as well. So when we, it's just the simple matter of typing faster is not the same as more productivity. We have a lot of other activities, and sometimes we type things that turn out to be bad. I mean, it's kind of common sense, but we tend to glorify the one unique aspect of what we do.
That Today Was a Good Day paper in particular, when you sent that my way, I was so inspired by that paper. I don't know if I mentioned to you. I actually reached out to Andre Zimmerman, the lead author.
Oh, great.
work on it. Yeah, we've had 2 conversations so far. We're talking about maybe doing some work together. I, the TLDR, it was a automated analysis of the way 5,000 engineers at Microsoft were spending their time. And to me, to your point, the TLDR was that on average, on a good coding day, about 2.5 hours were spent in the IDE.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And that's not a design day. That's not a testing day. That's a good coding day. And that to me was kind of one of these like, wow, intuitively I knew the number was low. Like my experience is that the number is low, but I didn't realize like on average the number's that low.
Yeah. So essentially, if we want to optimize the process, I think we need to understand what's in the process. We need to understand also what we're optimizing for. And so, yeah, I had laid out, okay, this is what I think software engineering is. This is what I think coding is roughly. And programming as distinct from coding was a distinction. Leslie Lamport, who's a Turing Award winner, harps on in some interesting talks. But, just whether or not you call them, you draw the boundaries exactly where I'm drawing them when I use the terms, and we can define them later if we want. But the point is just to understand the sheer variety of the tasks that are involved and the sheer variety of like concerns we're trying to optimize for, other than just speed of implementation.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the Today's Good Day Paper because they took out time spent in meetings. That take that out of analysis. Everybody said, "Oh, I'm in so many meetings, I don't have time to code." Like none of that counted. I think they pointed, to a couple big things. Like one was just the cycle time of like, hey, there's like typing new code, and then there's just the iterating in the CLI, like going back and forth between IDE and CLI, and iterating. Did this work? Did this work? Did this work? Type a little more. Did this work? And just the sheer amount of time spent on that iteration that I thought was fascinating. And then there were a couple references to like broken environments and tests that used to work and no longer work for reasons outside of the developer's code, and the sheer amount of time that represents. That caught my eye. But I'm curious, when you think of like, all right, so what are like if it's a small amount of time that's actually going into like typing new code itself, like where is the rest of the time going?
Yeah. Part of it is in understanding what needs to be typed or erased. And that sounds like one thing, just understanding the situation, but that is actually a huge variety of things. We read code in order to do that. We talk to people in order to do that. We go to meetings. We, learn stuff about our local context, or, I spend a lot of time in self-study about just industrial skills in general. So understanding so I guess you could, if you really wanted to say, like you are always either editing it or you are understanding what needs to be edited, but that, massively oversimplifies your interaction with your environment.
Yeah. Or I think there's some of a big bucket like trying to figure out what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll care, like obviously, like kind of your prior role and then current role, like, I mean, you must be spending a lot of time thinking about this part. Where do you think AI tools today fit into the coding cycle, the engineering work outside of coding cycle? Like, I mean, I'm going to ask you like for a prediction here in a little bit, so I'm trying to tee that. But I'm really curious where you think tools sit today.
Yeah. So if we're going to say there's such a thing as coding and such a thing as programming and such a thing as software engineering, I would say that we have right now some pretty impressive coding assistants that don't have a lot of vision for how well they affect your ability to program or how they affect your ability to perform software engineering. And I think the value then is making them better, more seamlessly and productively integrate with the rest of that life cycle and with all the copious other tools, we have that make that tick. So does that begin to help you, and that's where coding agents should go. But then also, since there are so many other kinds of tasks, also perhaps other assistants for other things that aren't coding.
Well, let's just zoom into that one for a sec, because
I think you work on something like that, don't you?
Well, yeah, on the other tasks outside of coding, like happy to give the RunWhen pitch anytime, which is the job. But one thing that I really noticed, love it or hate, my role at RunWhen, like I'm still contributing code to our product. And frankly, in an era of AI coding assistance, it's a lot more fun because I can get a heck of a lot done in an hour, whereas before I could get like a little bit done in an hour. And most days I only have an hour. But it may be to your point on like, am I getting it right, coding versus programming? The way you've laid it out, I had this amazing hour yesterday where I was using a coding assistant that helped with a particular API that I hadn't used before. I kind of probably could have guessed. I probably could have looked up the documentation, but like a handful of prompts, and this thing had a skeleton of interactions to fetch the data structures that I wanted out of this API that I'd never used. And like, wow, that just saved me a lot of time. To your point, learning about how this particular API was structured, et cetera, et cetera. It also made a bunch of assumptions around time versus space trade-offs in the way that it structured the data that came back that I could easily see and I didn't want, and I wanted to make a different set of trade-offs. And so I was able to ask for a different set of trade-offs. And I think that hey, I see the time-space trade-off in current implementation, and I would like to make a different trade-off. Correct me if I'm wrong. You would consider that to be a programming topic, whereas, hey, can I just fish all the data out of this API? Like that's a coding topic.
Yeah. So you were reasoning about the behavior of the complete program, and making decisions about it if you thought it was desirable, and that might not have even been a correctness concern, in your case, but it was operational characteristics. Like that's a great example of where you had an assistant that helped you with the coding part. Very blurry line here, but that programming part, it didn't really help you at all. It wasn't equipped to even say that it was making an assumption about how the data was going to be represented that would impact that.
I mean, just to continue on with this particular story, in this particular case, like the next step was that the data structure that I wanted need to get cached in Redis, and the Redis instance in the test cluster was down. And so, there went the rest of my hour, which was a bummer.
Right. That pesky context, right? And this is like when we try to deliver something that works in a demo, and someone's going to need to use it in this context where they got to worry about if the Redis cluster is up or not. Yeah. Where did the time go? I mean, you've described an experience that many people have every day.
So just to make sure, just to like complete the story here, the coding assistant helping me with so I didn't need to read the API documentation. That fits in your ontologies coding. Hey, it made a time space decision. I would like to revisit that particular decision, make a slightly different decision. Hey, that fits as programming, but not coding. And a very fuzzy line. And then, hey, it was all for naught because Redis was down anyways, and I had to figure out how to get that back up and running, and that like took most of my time. Like that would be engineering that is neither software engineering that is neither programming nor coding.
It could be. I think this is a reasonable enough place to draw the distinction. I also say, like, it would become software engineering if you had to continue to maintain that program over time. I think you're not really even engaging in something we need software engineering for if you're still just writing the first version of it, which is all you're describing, right? I'm thinking of like, what is that program doing in 5 years? Who is supporting it and stuff? Like when we talk about the long-term effects of these, of really any practice change, which would include that we're using LLMs to help us code, like what is that downstream impact on like the sustainability on maintainability, right? Which at the scale of the program you're talking about might not be a concern yet.
That's very, very fair. So you call that, let's call it as a model for conversation, that would be a maintaining phase that maybe we include in the overall software engineering, but maintaining is not really programming, and it's not really coding. It's kind of another part of the life cycle.
Yeah, while you're maintaining, you will code and program, but it tends to be a lot more less balanced towards the in-editor typing time and more towards the wrestling with my context time. And I tend to see maintenance as just the principal challenge in the industry. Like it'd be an exaggeration to say writing new stuff is a completely solved problem, but relative to just, I mean, you have a startup because people have existing workloads in Kubernetes.
Yes.
You're writing new code for the sole reason that people have existing code.
Yeah, very, very good point. Yes. Yeah. I mean, well, some funny ones on them, maybe as a bridge, because I think the maintenance one is interesting. I think a lot of people, who listen to this, would kind of define these by traditional job roles. Like, hey, you're a software developer, so therefore your job is this phase. You're an ops per, SRE, PE, DevOps, platform engineer. Like your job is over on this other phase, or your job is infrastructure, horizontal underneath. But I kind of think as we're all getting a lot more productive, or at least I'm getting a heck of a lot more productive with AI. Like, it's kind of span more roles here. The roles themselves are getting a little bit fuzzier.
Mm-hmm.
Really curious to see, like, as you snapshot today, where do you think AI tools, like which of the different kind of job functions there, like who's the biggest beneficiary today? And as you kind of think about the evolution of them, next year and the year after, do you think that's going to change?
Yeah, so certainly I think now you have, in 2025, you already had maybe most people having at least dabbled in it. It'll continue to feel like that. But the difference between dabbling and really leveraged use of it, where you've had to figure out how to really get the most out of this, as you've done. I've seen some of your notes on what your approach is when you use these to get the most value out of them, and it's quite detailed. You're doing a lot of thinking that's not written on the tin when you bought the thing about how you're gonna do that. I think that is the state of things. To really get the advertised value out of it, you've kind of got to invent your own workflow. And that's not really a product yet. So I think we will continue to have a lot of trailblazers, and I think we'll need to see what works over time, what works well on day two. What can I, maybe this workflow works well for Kyle, but can I get a team of Kyles doing that? Or what happens when that happens? These are things we need to shake out. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I think, at least, like, as I look at our engineering team now, like I mean, as everybody on our team knows, as far as I'm concerned, every individual on the team has unlimited decision-making authority and unlimited budget to try every single AI coding tool that they want. Period. Full stop. Right? Which leads to a lot of internal trial and error, and I think that's actually going really, really well. The tough part with AI coding tools has been for us, like, very large code bases with large data structures that might be defined somewhere in a very different part of the code base than the consumer that's currently using them. It's not insurmountable, but I mean, it means that, like, it takes a few extra iterations. The spot where AI coding tools absolutely fly, like do an amazing job, is when we're building, especially small tools that we use to either build, maintain, or like pre-sales tools, or like extra integrations between our product and some other product, where it's like a small separable piece of standalone software. And like, I mean, these AI coding tools, like, it's a pleasure, because the sheer amount of them that are getting it right, like in the first and second try, is just absolutely amazing. So I think that one's going particularly well. I think the product that we're working on specifically is much more like kind of the Redis is down in the cluster, which lends itself more in the maintenance phase. And at least my personal prediction is like, hey, a lot of these start in the self-contained small project space. They'll get better and better and better at the very, very large software, many person engineering team software project space. And then tools like ours, and we're certainly not the only ones, right? There are a whole bunch of folks that are now chasing this. So, okay, there's stuff that's actually not related to the source code that really, really, really impacts the engineering process. And how can we use AI in a big way, like modern AI to benefit the people for whom that's a major concern, or to benefit the people for whom that really, really impacts them once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. But I think that'll be a slightly later phase. Like I think that there's, the very first phase is like clearly up and running and kind of crossed the chasm. This next phase is still in the process of crossing the chasm.
Yeah, so you've identified a kind of category of use case where like I just want some self-contained tool, and it's very easy for me to get an LLM to help me, or an LLM infused agent to help me produce that, because I'm able to constrain like the amount of outside context that's caught up in this work, right? And that's I think is a really insightful trade-off. Like that kind of thinking will help people who are trying to get this to have more insight, because I know some people just have the intuition. It's like, no, I can't ask it about this because it doesn't know how our stuff is. It's going to give me a bunch of wrong answers if I do this. But if I ask it, to help me make this CLI tool that does this, single purpose thing, if I'm able to constrain, the amount of space it has to wrangle, I'm more likely to get a good result. I mean, that is certainly the kind of thing that will be helpful to users. It's also a key to why I'm making such a big deal about scaled software engineering being an unsolved problem for these things to such a high degree, right? Because that's what makes our work hard, is there's all this context all the time.
And I mean, this is a really, really esoteric question, but having just like done a whole bunch of stuff about named entity recognition for a long winding journey on a pre-sales tool that's not worth getting into, but the context, we always talk about like, can we get enough context in? Can we get enough context in? Can we get enough context in? Do you think that there's a really esoteric question, but do you think it's fair to say, like, let's define the amount of context as the amount of named entities, call it like, nouns, proper nouns that somebody or an LLM needs to know. And I think like, man, all of the big LLMs are getting to know like anything where any proper noun that's mentioned more than a handful of times on the web, like they seem to kind of get up in their training data. There are an awful lot of proper noun. The name of every single microservice that we run is a proper noun, and like there's that an LLM can't index that. That's putting up data. Many of the verbs that we use around those nouns are kind of industry jargon, but some of them are like a little funky, and some of them kind of sound like English, but we have a pretty specific connotation around them. So do you think that there's a world in which there's like enough public context to matter? I'm personally like a little bit pessimistic, because in the particular software engineering domain, there's so many very, very important pronouns that are so organizationally specific that we'll never see LLMs like out of the box build amazing like massive scale software without knowing all of those pronouns, but we can kind of fake it a little bit around the edges. And they can build pretty amazing massive scale software with all the public pronouns. But I'm curious to get your take. It was kind of an esoteric point.
Yes, no, this it sounds esoteric, but actually this is central to getting these things to perform well in real context, I think. So I'm glad you brought it up. So in 2025, 2026, I think in these kinds of assistants, really probably in any kind of AI assistant, people are going to be very fixated on trying to, can we customize it for our company? Can we get this thing to give reasonable answers based on the decisions that we've made? And that's not going to be what was just on the internet as of the training cutoff. There are all sorts of choices that we want to be implicit, and things like fine tuning, things like RAG, other techniques, are being introduced to try to make these things more context sensitive. So that's part of it. Like there are a bunch of sort of complicated, ways that we've been able to make these more customizable. It's viable, but there's a limit. And I'm going to break with some people on this. These things are not people. like it can have all the right data and it still won't always make the conclusion you would like it to make, because it doesn't have personhood. These are not virtual employees. These are really cool tools.
Funny joke. We really see it because we do have one component of our software that we call the runner. And the runner runs things, and the runner is up sometimes, the runner is down sometimes. Maybe we have metrics about the runner, maybe we don't. Maybe the runner is this and is in an uncertain state. And it really confuses the shit out of a LLM. When you say, hey, what state is the runner in? And it'll say tired. And you're like, well, me too.
Yeah, and so every time you see one of those, like, they'll get better, they'll continue to get better. But if you think that if I give it the same context, that it will do the same thing a person would with that same context, you're just crawling up the wrong tree, in my opinion. These things. It's like saying there's a relational database as good as a human. It's like it's neither as good nor worse as a human. It's a relational database. Stop. And we have trained these things to mimic us in certain ways, and that makes this very confusing. But we have to really try and see as clear as we can on how what they're good at.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of came up with this hypothesis that like the time that it takes a human to ramp up on a new team is kind of the time that it takes for them to learn all of these proper nouns that are very, very, very specific to that team. And it's kind of interesting to look at it. Like software engineering has a lot of proper nouns for the industry. And then for any particular engineering team, if you've been working on the code base for a couple of years, there are a lot of proper nouns with an awful lot of nuance around them. And then I noticed for larger engineering teams where you have many different functions, you get like, hey, the DevOps team has their own set of proper nouns, and the software developers have their own set of proper nouns. The QA team has their own set of proper nouns. The SREs have their own set of proper nouns. I'm at least a little bit optimistic that over the next couple of years, we'll see every team will wind up with their own initially very siloed set of AI tools, but it won't be that long before we see really, really cool tools that are effectively collaborations in between different teams that are assisted by LLMs that can start to help people, not even without understanding the pronouns, at least draw linkages between, hey, the particular code that you're working on is on a particular service, and we just found out from the infrastructure team that the cluster that is running that service is currently down. Mm-hmm. That's not your source code. Your source code is your source code, not the cluster. Their cluster is their cluster, and it's not your source code, but recognize that y'all are both having some trouble.
Yeah.
I'm a little optimistic, but that's just me.
I'm optimistic that you can build that. Like, we can create that. We can make that a reality. A lot of things that we want to achieve, we could have been years ago. And I think it will be a matter of whether those things are incentivized, whether we find a way for that to be what we decide to build. Will we build AI and other tooling that separates us, or will it bring us closer together? That is a decision people will have to make.
Yeah. You said decision that people will have to make. At the same time, I just looked over and I saw this fantastic comment. When we worked with search engines, humans often wanted to override the results to show certain things first. No general logic applied, more personal agenda. There could be personal decisions within the enterprise engineering team on this one, I think. But actually, I really like that comment for all nuance it brings.
Yeah. Well, you have history working on at a search company of some note, so you would probably have a lot of experience there.
Right. On a slightly lighter, first of all, I mean, we've talked about call the topic coding versus programming versus software engineering First coding, under that coding, programming, and phases that happen afterwards, maintenance. We talked a little bit about kind of the different tools that would fit under these different categories, and I love the way that you put it. We talked a little bit about some more kind of esoteric academic topics about, I think, which we both find very particularly interesting. But on a slightly lighter note, I always like to ask this question because somebody I really respect, Jim, actually asked it to me, and so now plagiarism is the best form of flattery. I butchered that one, but if you were going to give some career advice to your younger self, what would it be?
So one of them would be to try and be curious about things that you might not think to. So an example of people like me who would identify themselves as software menders, who are very concerned with just the sort of longevity of the product. We will always rant about tech debt, and we will get told it's not a priority, and we will feel sorry for ourselves, and we will operate in areas of neglect and then be surprised when we end up neglected ourselves. And if I could go back, I would say, when they tell you it's not a priority, ask them what is. Like, get a better picture of what the person's incentives are that is telling you no. Because it often is the case that like we're looking out for the health of the system. Like ultimately what we're looking out for is, it's involved in some business goal. We just have to figure out what the chain of causation here. And so use your curiosity to create alignment or find alignment there. And the other one would be, don't be afraid to have a personal brand.
I would love to actually hear more about that, given the personal brand that you have created in this ecosystem here over a fairly short period of time. But I think, why don't we save that one save that one for our next conversation.
Great. Well, thanks a lot.
Ray Meyer, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate this. But it's just good to, you look happy. It's good to see you.
Yeah, you too. You can catch me on Craft vs. Cruft on YouTube and the Empathy and Tech podcast.
Hey, thanks a ton. For everybody listening, we are having our next one. Let's see. Somebody from RunWhen will post the schedule for our next. I believe that we're up in about 2 weeks. We have a fantastic set of guest speakers actually scheduled in here for through the rest of January, February, and March. We look forward to seeing you on the next. Thanks.